There's a moment most people never forget. You're standing in a room full of people you've known for years, co-workers, old friends, maybe even family, and something feels off. Not dramatically off. Not in a way you can point to or explain. Just slightly wrong, like a song playing a half step out of tune. Conversations seem rehearsed. Smiles arrive, a beat too late. Someone changes the subject right when you start speaking. You go home and replay the whole thing in your head. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't start a fight, didn't say something offensive, didn't step on anyone's toes. And yet the distance was real. The tension was real. That low-grade chill in the air was completely real. Here's what nobody tells you about that experience. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't paranoia. What you picked up on is one of the oldest and most consistent patterns in human psychology. A pattern the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung spent decades studying, writing about, and warning people about. And once you understand what's actually driving it, the confusion disappears. Not because things get easier, necessarily, but because you finally stop blaming yourself for something that was never about you. So let's talk about what's really going on. Let's talk about why awareness makes you dangerous, why growth makes you a target, and why the most psychologically honest version of you will always make certain people deeply, quietly uncomfortable. The hidden architecture of human discomfort. Most of us grew up with a pretty simple model of why people don't get along. Someone says something mean, someone breaks a promise, someone cheats or lies or lets you down in some clear and obvious way. Conflict has a cause, and the cause is visible. But Carl Jung looked underneath that model and found something far more disturbing. Jung argued that the most powerful and most common form of social hostility has almost nothing to do with what you actually did. It has everything to do with what your presence makes other people feel about themselves. To understand why, you have to understand one of Jung's most foundational ideas: the shadow. Every person alive carries two versions of themselves. There's the version they show the world, put together, reasonable, generally decent. Jung called this the persona, which is literally Latin for mask. The persona is the face we curate for public life. It's how we want to be seen, the identity we've constructed and maintained and defended over years. And then there's everything else. The shadow is the part of you that didn't make the cut. It's the anger you buried because expressing it seemed dangerous. It's the envy you couldn't admit because admitting it felt shameful. It's the hunger for status, the secret pettiness, the fear of being ordinary, the quiet terror of looking in the mirror and not measuring up. The shadow isn't evil, exactly. It's just the accumulation of everything a person has rejected about themselves in order to maintain the persona they prefer. Here's the critical thing Jung understood. The shadow never goes away. You can ignore it. You can suppress it. You can pile layers of persona on top of it and walk around for decades pretending it isn't there. But it stays. And when something or someone in the outside world pokes at it, when your presence, your behavior, or simply who you are brushes up against what someone has been hiding from themselves, the psychological system reacts. It reacts defensively. It reacts, in many cases, with something that feels a lot like hatred. Why awareness turns you into a threat. Here's the uncomfortable truth about becoming more perceptive. The more clearly you see people, their patterns, their motivations, the gap between what they say and what they actually mean, the more threatening your presence becomes to people who are still deeply identified with their persona. Not because you say anything, not because you call anyone out, but because your very presence introduces the possibility that you see what they're hiding, and that possibility alone is enough to trigger a defensive reaction. Think about it from their side. Imagine you've spent years carefully managing how people perceive you. You project confidence even when you feel hollow. You perform generosity while keeping score. You smile at the right moments and say the right things, and work very hard to make sure nobody looks too closely. And then someone walks into the room who just sees, who doesn't seem impressed by the performance, who isn't fooled by the social theater. That person doesn't have to say a word. Their calm, their directness, their apparent indifference to the games everyone else is playing, all of it registers as a threat. Their presence alone is a kind of exposure. Jung called what happens next projection. Rather than confronting the discomfort internally, rather than asking, why does this person make me uneasy and what does that say about me? The mind finds a simpler solution. It attributes the problem to the person who triggered the feeling. Suddenly, you're not someone who sees clearly. You're arrogant, you're judgmental, you're cold, or weird, or a lot. The accusation has nothing to do with you. It's the shadow looking for somewhere to land. And once projection takes hold, something important shifts. People stop responding to who you actually are. They start reacting to what your presence stirs up inside them. You could be patient and kind and consistent every single day, and it won't matter because they're not looking at you anymore. They're looking at the mirror your presence holds up. The 7 ways you silently trigger people. Let's get specific, because this dynamic doesn't announce itself. It shows up in small, hard-to-name moments that accumulate over time into a pattern you can't ignore. First, you reflect what they've avoided. Imagine you've been working on yourself. Maybe you've gotten serious about your health, your finances, your emotional reactions. You're not lecturing anyone. You're not posting about it every day. You're just living differently. And something subtle starts to shift in certain friendships. The jokes get a little sharper. The comments get a little more dismissive. You're obsessed. You're too serious. You've changed. None of it is direct. All of it has plausible deniability. But the pattern is clear. What's happening is that your growth has become a mirror. Your discipline reflects their avoidance. Your consistency reflects their excuses. You didn't put that mirror there on purpose, but it's there. And some people simply cannot tolerate what they see in it. So the target of that discomfort shifts from themselves to you. Second, you represent what they gave up on. People rarely openly resent someone who's struggling more than they are. Resentment, almost universally, runs upward. It goes toward the person who represents something the resentful person knows. On some level, they could have done or become. The colleague who actually finishes what they start. The friend who walked away from the relationship that was making them miserable. The family member who finally went back to school. These people aren't attacking anyone, but their existence quietly indicts the choices everyone around them made. When you represent a possibility that someone else quietly abandoned, you become inconvenient. Devaluing you, writing you off as lucky, or arrogant, or out of touch, is the easiest way to make the discomfort stop. Third, you've stopped needing their approval. This one is subtle and almost universally misunderstood. Most social relationships, whether we like to admit it or not, are held together partly by mutual dependency. One person needs validation, another needs to feel needed. Someone provides emotional labor, someone else provides status, and the whole system stays in balance as long as everyone plays their role. When you start becoming psychologically independent, when you stop chasing approval, stop over-explaining yourself, stop calibrating your behavior to what other people think, something happens to the people around you. The leverage disappears. The usual emotional levers stop working. From your perspective, this is growth. From their perspective, it can feel like rejection, because what you're really doing, even if unintentionally, is removing them from a position of informal influence they may not have even known they relied on. They can't easily explain this feeling, so the mind reframes it. You've become distant. You've changed. You think you're better than everyone. What they're actually describing is the loss of control they had over you, but you became emotionally independent is a lot harder to admit than you became arrogant. Fourth, they can't predict you anymore. Social manipulation, and I mean the everyday, mostly unconscious kind, depends on predictable reactions. If I push this button, I get that response. If I guilt you, you apologize. If I criticize you, you try harder to earn my approval. If I give you a compliment, you soften. When you stop reacting the way people expect, the entire script breaks down. You're not hostile about it. You're not aggressive. You simply don't respond to the usual moves. You don't bite on the bait. You don't perform the expected emotional reaction. And for someone who has been running that playbook, even unconsciously, your non-reaction is deeply unsettling, because it means you see the game. And people who depend on not being seen playing the game will never be comfortable around someone who clearly, calmly, without making a big deal of it, is watching the whole thing. Fifth, you refuse to maintain the comfortable fiction. Every social group, every friend circle, every family, every workplace operates on a set of unspoken agreements. We don't talk about certain things. We pretend certain behaviors are normal. We collectively agree to look the other way on specific dynamics that, if anyone named them out loud, would create chaos. These agreements aren't always malicious. Often they're just the path of least resistance, the social lubricant that keeps things from blowing up. But they're fictions, and maintaining them requires everyone's participation. When you stop participating, when you decline to laugh at the thing that isn't actually funny, when you decline to agree with the thing you genuinely disagree with, when you name the dynamic that everyone is pretending not to notice, you become a problem. Not because you attacked anyone, but because you broke the agreement. And groups protect their agreements aggressively, often without consciously realizing they're doing it. Sixth, you started saying no. For a long time, maybe you were easy to lean on, easy to access, easy to take for granted. You said yes when you meant no, absorbed things you shouldn't have absorbed, made yourself available to people who were rarely available to you. People appreciate this, but rarely consciously. What they actually experience is comfort. The comfort of knowing there's someone in their lives with soft enough boundaries that they can behave however they want without consequence. And then something changes. You start drawing lines. You pull back from the arrangements that were costing you more than they were worth. You say no, and you mean it. And the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries, some of whom genuinely cared about you, this isn't necessarily about malice. Experience that shift as a loss. What follows is rarely honest. People don't say, "I liked it better when I could walk all over you." They say you've changed. They say you're cold now, or difficult, or selfish. But what they're really describing is the end of a comfortable imbalance. The end of a deal they never had to negotiate, because you never asked for one. Seventh, you're moving forward and the gap is showing. This might be the hardest one to navigate, because it touches people you genuinely love. When you change, really change, not just superficially, but in how you see the world, what you're willing to accept, what you're building toward, you create distance from people who are standing still. Not because you're trying to leave anyone behind, not because you've decided you're better than your old life, but because you are, simply and factually, in a different place than you were. The people who haven't moved feel that gap. And the question the gap asks, silently, relentlessly, is, why not? Why am I still the same? That question is uncomfortable. And when a question is too uncomfortable to answer honestly, the mind deflects. It turns the question into a judgment, and then it turns the judgment outward. Your growth becomes proof that you think you're special. Your changes become evidence of disloyalty. Your new priorities become an implicit rejection of the old ones, and by extension, of the people who still hold them. You didn't do any of this on purpose. But here's what Jung would want you to understand. Their reaction isn't really about you. It's about what your progress forces them to feel about their own stagnation. And feeling that is very, very hard. What is actually happening underneath all of this? Take a step back from all 7 patterns and look at what they have in common. In every case, the resentment you're experiencing isn't a response to your behavior. It's a response to the psychological pressure your presence creates. You're not causing it by doing something wrong. You're causing it by doing something right. By becoming more honest, more aware, more independent, more yourself, in a world where most people are working very hard to avoid exactly that process in their own lives. Jung believed that the deepest purpose of human psychological development was what he called individuation. It's the process of becoming whole, of integrating the shadow instead of hiding it, of dropping the persona that no longer serves you, of moving toward an authentic self rather than an inherited one. Individuation is rare. It's uncomfortable. It requires you to look at the parts of yourself you'd rather not see, accept the parts of your history you'd rather forget, and move through the world without the security of everyone's approval. But when someone is doing it, genuinely doing it, not performing it for social points, it creates a specific kind of disturbance in the people around them. Because individuating people are impossible to fully control. They don't stay in their assigned roles. They don't need your validation. They don't perform the expected reactions. And they have a way of seeing through performances that most people rely on for their sense of safety. That makes them threatening, not in a violent sense, in a deeply existential sense. Your becoming is a quiet indictment of everyone who decided not to. What to do when you recognize this pattern. Understanding this doesn't automatically make it painless. Recognizing that someone's hostility is rooted in their own shadow doesn't make the hostility disappear, but it changes what you do with it. The most common mistake people make when they start noticing this dynamic is to try to fix it, to shrink back down, to perform more of the expected roles, to sand off the edges that make people uncomfortable. This is understandable. We're wired for belonging, and the feeling of being slowly excluded from a group you cared about is genuinely painful. But here's what actually happens when you make yourself smaller to keep other people comfortable. The resentment doesn't go away, it just becomes more familiar. Because the thing that triggered it, your potential, your honesty, your refusal to stay stuck, was never really the problem. The problem is what those things reflect back at the people around you. And that problem belongs to them, not to you. So what do you actually do? You let some relationships evolve naturally. Not every connection that made sense at one version of you will make sense at another version. That's not failure. That's honest. You stop interpreting every negative reaction as personal feedback. Some of it is. Someone telling you with genuine care that you've been distant lately deserves to be heard. But the cold shoulder from someone who never needed anything from you until you stopped being convenient for them, that's information too, just a different kind. You look for the people who move toward you when you're honest instead of away from you. They exist. The same quality that makes you threatening to people who are hiding from themselves makes you deeply compelling to people who are trying to find themselves. Both reactions come from the same place. One is fear, the other is recognition. And perhaps most importantly, you do your own shadow work. Because here's the part of all of this that's easy to miss. The same patterns that operate in the people around you, the projection, the resentment, the subtle hostility triggered by things that hit too close to home, those patterns exist in you too. Nobody gets out of being human. Everybody has a shadow. Everybody has things they'd rather not look at. And it's very easy to get so focused on recognizing projection in other people that you forget to check whether you're doing it yourself. The goal isn't to become someone who sees through everyone while being perfectly transparent yourself. That's a new kind of persona, the enlightened observer, which is its own shadow in disguise. The goal is to do the honest, ongoing, imperfect work of becoming more real, more integrated, more you. Here's what tends to happen over time when you stay on this path. The social field around you shifts. Some people drift, a few disappear, and it hurts, especially if you genuinely cared about them. But something else also happens. The relationships that survive, and the new ones that form, feel different. They're built on something more solid than convenience, more honest than mutual flattery, more durable than the shared agreement to never challenge each other. They're built on actual recognition, one real person seeing another real person and deciding that's worth something. You also stop being quite so exhausted, because the exhaustion of maintaining performances, of pretending to agree, of playing roles, of managing how you're perceived by people who wouldn't like the real you anyway, is a specific and relentless kind of drain. And when it starts to lift, even partially, you realize how much of your energy had been going toward keeping everyone comfortable at the expense of being honest. Carl Jung didn't write about shadow integration because it's a pleasant journey. He wrote about it because he believed it was the most important work a human being could do. Not important in the sense of impressive or admirable. Plenty of people are impressive and admirable while being completely out of touch with their own inner life. Important in the sense of necessary. In the sense that without it, you spend your whole life reacting to the world as if through a fogged window, seeing shapes, but never quite making out what's real. The fogged window is the persona. The shadow is everything on the other side of it. And the work of individuation, your work, and anyone's work who chooses it, is learning to see clearly. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but clearly enough to know the difference between a relationship that's ending because you're moving forward and one that's ending because you've done something wrong. That distinction matters more than almost anything else. Because most of the things that look like rejection, the cold shoulder, the distance, the quiet exclusion, the faint hostility you can't quite name, aren't really about you at all. They're about the people experiencing them, and the parts of themselves your presence asks them to look at. You can't change that. You can't perform your way out of being a mirror. What you can do is stop flinching every time someone doesn't like what they see in it.